Welcome back to the 127 Fit podcast. Today's guest is a doctor of physical therapy. She is also a nutrition therapy practitioner and personal trainer. Today's guest is Dr. Amy Osborne. Amy, I want to welcome you to the 127 Fit podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, for sure. So Amy, we're just going to jump into the 4 questions that I like to call the conversational warm-up questions. The first question that I have for you is, how do you start your day? Do you have a specific morning routine, your morning ritual you like to stick to on most mornings?
Yeah, I since I was 18, I've actually been teaching fitness classes first thing in the morning. So I am something of a early riser by nature, and that I wake up and am super energized. And so I feel like I kind of hit the ground running. Right now, I'm teaching classes most weekday mornings, and then get up and work out. So the one thing that is like a consistent is that I boil water and drink warm lemon water every morning.
Cool.
I don't really know why, but it's like signals to me. I think it's good to drink water first thing in the morning anyways,
for sure.
That has become my one constant every morning.
Perfect. Now, in terms of kind of like being like an early riser, because like I've had, tons and tons of people on the podcast, and like one of the themes of all of these podcast guests is like most of them, get up pretty early.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is it about like kind of like the early mornings for you that just kind of like maybe lights you up or really, energizes you, so to speak?
Well, from a physiologic standpoint, we actually are high in our cortisol levels first thing in the morning. So there is some actual scientific basis for why we wake up early. That kind of initial spike in cortisol gets us going and gets us ready for the day. So sometimes, when people sleep in too much, they end up groggier. So I also think that having a really consistent sleep-wake time just makes you more productive. If that's when your body naturally wants to get up, then it's not really a task. Mm-hmm. So I think making that a habit for me has just made me really, efficient and productive.
Now, touch on, for maybe somebody that's not listening, you mentioned cortisol. Like, what's the importance, or kind of like what's that all about in terms of like just our bodies?
Sure. So I think that cortisol gets a bad rap from a lot of people. People hear that and they think like, oh, cortisol's bad. It's associated with stress. And yeah, if you have cortisol release all the time, that's a problem. But we need to have cortisol because that's what gets us motivated to get things done. You know what I mean? Having that spike in the morning gets you up, gets you moving. It also is released during exercise, and that's what can get you really amped up to get through a workout. So cortisol is not always a bad thing.
Right. Now, cortisol is a hormone, is that correct?
Correct. So it's released from our adrenal glands. So adrenal means above the renal gland, so the meaning the kidneys. So they sit right above the kidneys.
And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but like just through like our diet, so like through the way we eat and what we eat, that can have an effect on our cortisol levels as well. Is that
Sure.
fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that, what we really fail to mention, I think sometimes as health practitioners, is how interrelated the hormone system is. And if we throw one thing out of whack, so insulin, for example, is a hormone, right? So if we eat too much sugar, all of our hormones are going to be affected by that, cortisol included.
Okay, cool. All right, so the next question that I have for you, do you have a favorite book or a book that you like to gift often?
Yeah, the book that I always recommend is The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. He was, I might butcher this, a physiologist. Maybe he was a professor at medical school in Wisconsin, and he basically proposes the idea that Newtonian physics is something that we really understand, right? If I drop this pencil, we know gravity is going to make it fall. It creates observable phenomena. We have then applied that to modern medicine. We also know that quantum physics is really real, like the energy of things. But because it's not observable phenomena, we've never really applied that to the medical model. So we've never really thought about how our brains can truly change the way our bodies work from an energetic standpoint. So being able to fight disease with just the power of our minds. And that it's not really so woo-woo. It's just that we don't understand how that works yet. We haven't applied it to anything because we can't really observe that so well.
Cool.
So I love that book.
All right. Is there a book that you're currently reading?
So I mean, I love to read
Yeah.
fiction. I'm currently reading City of Girls by
Oh,
Elizabeth
okay.
Gilbert. Just fiction.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
do
cool.
I'm also reading Ray Dalio's Principles book, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
like a picture book.
Uh-huh.
When I say reading it, like you can read it in 10 minutes, but
Yeah,
I'm like
yeah,
going
yeah.
back and actually doing the exercises because everything he has to offer is just awesome.
Yeah. Do you find kind of like, in terms of like the fictional side of reading, is it kind of like maybe like an escape, or just kind of like a time where you can kind of just like check out of the reality of kind of like the day-to-day tasks and things that you got going on?
100%. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that it's really good for our brains to detach in a way. I think that we get so used to using social media or something that
Yeah.
is not really like detaching. We think it is, but we're like being presented with all of this stuff that we're going to be processing
For sure.
subliminally for hours to come, whereas reading a book is just reading a book.
Cool. And the thing about reading is like it's stimulating and challenging our brain, so it's a healthy thing, right?
For
So,
sure. I'm
Cool.
always reading something fiction.
Good.
Always.
I like it. Fun fact about Amy today, right?
Yeah.
Always reading something fictional. Okay, so the next question that I have for you in terms of the conversational warm-up, Amy, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, or word? Now, I kind of like to preface this with, we all go through different seasons in life. So this can be a favorite quote, mantra, or word for maybe 2020, kind
Sure.
of this season of life. It can be a favorite quote, mantra, or word from a previous season of life. Kind of however you want to navigate that and take that. Favorite quote, mantra, or word?
When I was in high school, my high school quote in the yearbook was a Buddhist quote, everything we are is the result of our thoughts. And a couple years later, I was like, oh, why did I choose that? And recently, I've really like leaned back into that and really enjoyed that quote, because I think that the power of positive thought is huge. I mean, if you think that things are going to go badly, your subconscious brain is going to make sure that things go badly.
For sure, and I'm like a very staunch believer in terms of like mindset is everything. Like I firmly believe, even as a personal trainer, when I have consultations with people, potential clients or personal training clients, like I talk about mindset, and I said, everything starts with mindset, because it's like,
sure.
hey, like I've got to have the thought of like I need to lose weight or I need to make this change, and then obviously we have to follow through. But for me, like everything in life, in terms of health, business, absolutely everything, it starts with our mindset. It starts with the thoughts that we have, and the awesome thing is, as we understand this, is that we have the power as human beings to control our mindset, to control our thoughts. We've got millions of thoughts coming into our mind every single day. We can give into those thoughts, or we can kind of discard them. But it's our control, it's our power. Like what's kind of like, no pun intended, but what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think especially given what's kind of going on in the world right now, that's really what we have control over, right? When we don't have a lot of control, the most important thing to focus on is controlling our own thoughts and beliefs.
For sure,
and even recognizing that maybe you have beliefs that aren't true, because we can believe a lot of things that aren't true, especially working with some of my patients, right? They believe I had a back injury, I'm always going to have a back injury. And so really allowing people to realize that maybe their beliefs aren't totally founded, I think is the first step toward change. And to getting control over those thoughts is recognizing the fallibility in our belief system.
Now, how do you? I want to use that example because a lot of my personal training clients are seniors, right? And it's shoulder issues, it's
Totally.
low back issues, and it's knee issues. Like those are the three
Yeah.
hot spots. And as a physical therapist, I'm sure you've encountered that as well. Even people that aren't seniors. But I want to use that example because that's very fascinating. I think this is going to be very profound and something the listeners can kind of take away from our conversation here right away. Is you talked about like somebody comes in and they're like, I've got a bad back, right? You hear that all the time. My back's always hurts. I've got a bad back. And so then you said like they believe that, and then as they continue to believe that, that's going to be something that's going to be continued to be manifested in their lives. So as a physical therapist, how do you incorporate working with somebody who says, oh, my back hurts, and then you kind of step in and start talking about mindset? How do you kind of weave the mindset aspect in changing some of those conditioned beliefs and thoughts that we human beings have, or maybe a client has about their back? How do you weave that into your practice and incorporate that into working with people specifically kind of that have like the bad back or the bad knees or something like that?
Yes, so this is a long answer, and it's kind of two parts. One is education. So I think that everybody needs to know that as humans, as a living being, tissues heal. We know that. I mean,
Absolutely.
if you cut yourself really badly, it's going to heal. You know, certainly there are things that can impair healing. Stress is one of those things. Nutrition deficiencies. If you, like, let's say, cut your hand and you kept ripping the scab off, yeah, that's going to impair healing. But given the appropriate environment, tissues heal. So this is kind of where we get into that chronic pain thing of like, oh, well, I hurt my back 6 years ago. Okay, let's take another step back and look at what pain is. Pain is a signal that our brain creates that tells us, hey, don't do that, as a protective mechanism. We now know that we have the ability, our nervous system has the ability to become hypersensitized. So let's think about that pain as an alarm system again. Let's think of before, it would take somebody breaking into your house to set the alarm off. But now, because we've given more awareness to this issue and you've created some beliefs around it, now somebody walks across your lawn and the alarm goes off. So now you don't even have to do a heavy back squat if that's how you hurt your back before. You just have to do an unweighted squat and you tell yourself, oh my God, that really hurts. And it does hurt, but it's not because the tissue is damaged. It's because we have a processing system in our brain. So there's that huge kind of, we call this central sensitization PT. When an injury is no longer acute, it's been more than 6 months and it's now chronic, chances are the tissue has healed. There are other things perpetuating that belief system that I have a quote unquote bad back or a bad knee. The other side of that is getting people to move and realizing, I did that. So normally I'll have people say to me, we'll go with the squat analogy, I can't squat. So, okay, let's stand up and take a peek at your posture. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. Sit back down for me. Oh, you know what? Actually stand back up. Oh, well, look at that. You just did 2 squats. And I think getting people to recognize that, there are different ways to move. We just have to find the way that feels good and is the most appropriate for that person. So that's a long answer, I know.
No, that's thorough, and I appreciate it. Now, I want to touch on like fear, because fear is something that all of us human beings deal with. I've kind of got my own take on fear. I'm not going to get into all that, but for me, my personal experience, my personal perspective in terms of fear, it's this creation of our mind a lot of times, right? Like we're like, I'm afraid to do this, and then we condition ourselves to believe that, and then it comes to fruition, and it's just like this tailspin, right? Now, how does fear tie into, let's say, somebody that has back pain and they injure their back squatting, and they've told themselves they have this bad back, and that gets conditioned in their mind, it continues to be manifested. So how does fear limit some of these injuries or issues that we might have within our bodies, and how do you kind of navigate or work in terms of people's mindset specifically with fear?
Sure. That's a great question. I think that pain is 100% fear-driven, because fear is what keeps us alive. If we weren't afraid, we'd all be dead. We'd jump off bridges and run our cars into things because we weren't afraid of anything. So pain is the same thing. It's a survival mechanism, right? We have fear of that pain again. We don't want to do that again because we're going to hurt again. And so I think that it takes a lot of developing. Well, let me take a step back and say that those are beliefs, right? Those are stories that we've told ourselves. And beliefs should be built on experience. So I really like to have people experience positive things where they can build that evidence of like, oh, look, I was able to do that. I was able to bend over doing it this way without any back pain. And so really getting all of those positive experiences to be evidence to change their belief system so that maybe the fear starts to go away. But listen, like, fear is such a primitive emotion, right? And I've had a really bad back injury myself, and if I get under a really heavy bar sometimes and I'm not feeling strong that day, fear sets in, and the second it does, my back starts to hurt. And I've really, really tried to work through that of like, okay, I'm just going to not think about this. I know I can squat this. and I'm not going to be afraid. And all of a sudden, my back doesn't hurt. So, I don't know.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, before we move on to the last question in terms of the warm-up questions, I want you to just kind of like share, if you don't mind, where do you try to keep your mind? Because like obviously there's ebbs and flows each day in life, and
Yes.
We're currently in this coronavirus explosion here in our country and worldwide, and there's a lot of fear and all these things going on, right? How do you control your mind? Like, do you have some
Sure.
like mantras? Do you have some practices for you? Just like as Amy, not Dr. Amy, just
Yeah.
like in all the hats that you wear, just navigating your life day to day and things like that. What are some practices? What are some mantras? How do you control your mind? How do you just really focus yourself on what you need to get done or accomplish in a day?
Well, I think that focusing on past successes, as again, going back to that evidence, right? Oh, I know I can do this. I've done this before, and really focusing on what I am capable of and what I've proven myself to be capable
That's
of
great, yeah.
is really helpful for me to feel empowered. In terms of managing anxiety, I'm not going to lie to you, like that is a struggle for me. I'm like your stereotypical anxious kid, was worried about everything. I have seen therapists throughout my lifetime, and one person gave me an analogy that really, really resonated with me. And we have this bucket, and lots of things fill the bucket, and you don't experience anxiety until the bucket overfills. So if me being on social media is going to add some fluid to the bucket, I'm going to stay off of social media. If I know that's something that's going to contribute to my anxiety, I'm going to take it out. I know that personally, when I eat really poorly, I have a lot more anxiety. And so I'm going to take those things out because I know that there are circumstances outside of my control that are going to be contributing to that bucket. And I want to keep everything else out that I have control over.
Cool. And so you said you try to focus on past successes, right? Like that's kind of like one of your tricks or tips. That's cool. I wrote that down because that's even something with the podcast. Like in the beginning when I started this adventure, right? Like I kind of get like nervous because like most of the time I've never met my guests. It's just through social media, specifically Instagram, and it's like. But then now that I've done, I've released 131 episodes. It's like now it's just like there's no nerves. I just walk into it because it's like my guests look at me, even though I'm just like they're like, well, they'll say like you're the podcast, like you're the professional podcast. I'm like, I'm not a professional podcaster, but it's like, from their perspective, it's like, hey, I'm the podcast guy. Like, I'm the one that has all these episodes, and this is kind of like my side passion project. So for me, that's awesome. And even just thinking right now, even like playing sports when I was younger, it's like, you gain that confidence in athletics and in life when you look back and say, what, I've already been here, I've already done it, so I can do it again, right? So that was great insight. I appreciate you touching on that. Okay, so the last question in terms of the warm-up questions, Amy, do you have a favorite or most listened to podcast? If there's more than one, feel free to share. If you want to kind of go the route of maybe somebody that you find inspiration or great information through social media or YouTube, you can share that as well.
Okay. Gosh, so I love Comedy Bang Bang for something to just like, it's just absurd when I just need to not think. Or I love that when I'm commuting and I'm worried about the day, just to laugh. Laughter is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also really like This Is Success. They've got some really inspirational people on there, and I draw on a lot of people's lessons. Everybody has really great insight if they, especially successful people, right? If you hear some of their perspectives, a lot of it will resonate, or at least something tends to resonate with me. And then the one that I probably listen to the most is the Women's Health podcast. So 2 women's health physiotherapists interview people related to, and talk about things related to women's health. And I get a lot out of that clinically with what I do.
Cool. Love it. Okay, so kind of at this stage of our conversation, Amy, I kind of want to just take a dive into your backstory. So if you don't mind sharing with myself and the listeners, where did you grow up? Kind of like what did the childhood look like? Do you have any siblings? I'm pretty sure you were probably involved in sports. If you were involved in maybe some extracurricular activities, just paint a little bit of a picture in terms of kind of like what those younger years look like for you, if you don't mind?
Sure. I'm actually a Denver native.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So that's cool. I obviously grew up here. I was not as involved in athletics as you may think. I was a competitive equestrian. So there was a lot of not a lot of team. It was a lot of very much based on you and how you did. And I was really, I think, your stereotypical oldest girl in a family, very high achieving, very academically oriented, raised by parents that really valued education because they did not go through the education system.
Oh, okay.
So they just went to high school. They really wanted my brother and I to achieve as much as we could in academia. It was really funny. That was something that really mattered to them, is that we were, didn't study business. Like, we needed to be an engineer or an attorney or a doctor. Those were like the three things that we were allowed to be. And so I'm a people pleaser by nature. I put my nose down and I went to Regis here in Denver and studied neuroscience, thinking that I was going to be pre-med. In doing so, I kind of fell into exercise science, which is a really compatible minor with neuroscience, and loved it. And at the time when I was in college, I guess when I was 18, I started teaching fitness classes and really just loved kinesiology. I loved exercise science, loved everything about that. Got done with undergrad and had applied to one medical program here in Colorado, and that's a very competitive program. And no surprise, I did not get in. I had no experience. Like, they want to see some volunteer experience.
Right, yeah.
I remember at the interview, I'll never forget, they were like, why do you want to pursue medicine? And I didn't have an answer other than, well, because that's what I'm supposed to do.
Right, yeah.
Which is a terrible answer. And I mean, they saw right through me, and I didn't get in.
Yeah.
Which I was devastated. I mean, my whole belief system was shaken, but I wasn't doing it for me. I was doing it for somebody else. That really forced me to take a step back. I waited tables and bartended for 4 years, much to my parents' dismay, while I figured out what I wanted to do. Meanwhile, I was still really involved in the gym, really involved with teaching classes, personal training, and learning. I couldn't stop learning about the human body. And so, after a while, I think my dad was like, okay, so when are you going to actually use that degree you've got? And that, again, I think that part of it was wanting to please them. I just jumped into PT because PTs apparently have a really high rate of satisfaction in their jobs. It fell in line with what I did know I wanted to do, which is help people. I knew I wanted to help people. So then I went because I had never left Denver. I grew up in this kind of North Denver area. Regis is right here. I had never really left. So I moved to Chicago to go to Northwestern for PT school, just because I think I realized, if I want to figure out what I want to do, I've got to get away from my family and not be trying to please them. Not that they're bad people. They just really wanted us to be the best we could be.
For sure, of course.
So when I was in PT school, I really just always knew that I wasn't going to be your stereotypical PT. Everything we learned, I was like, man, whatever. And in fact, at the end of the program, they had people voted on, most likely to do this or most likely to do that, and I was voted most likely to not be a PT.
That's pretty encouraging.
I know. It was oh, okay. While I was in PT school, though, I really kind of found my niche in women's health, and I was the only one at the time, my cohort of 78 people, that went into women's health right out of undergraduate.
Cool. Yeah.
And I really loved it. And, when I did my clinical rotation in it, it really resonated with me. It felt like I was really kind of tapping into an underserved community and really able to affect change, which is what I wanted to do. I didn't want to just be in a stereotypical PT clinic where you come in and you've got 10 minutes one-on-one with your provider, and then you do exercises with a PTA for an hour, and then off you go.
Right.
That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be one-on-one with people and really affect change. So as I've practiced, I've kind of carved out, I don't know, a role for myself in Colorado where I really do a lot of pregnancy, postpartum work, and really empowering women, because there is a lot of information out there, especially in the information age. And information can often scare people.
Absolutely.
And so, there's a lot of information about diastasis recti, or ab separation in women, or just information around pregnancy, like, can I work out, can I not? And a lot of the information is like, no, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And I really love working with those women, especially female athletes that are like, I'm 9 months pregnant and I can do a muscle up. Cool, do your muscle ups. If you're not like having any issues, like, what's the problem? So I really liked working with that population. And I really like working with, I can't even believe these words are coming out of my mouth. I really like working with chronic pain. When I was in PT school, the one thing I said is, I'm never working with chronic pain. That sounds terrible. But what I've realized is that, you can really change these people's perspectives by tapping into their belief systems. And then also that led me down the path of nutrition therapy, because so much of how our body functions and feels is truly dependent upon what we're eating.
Absolutely.
And so if we're eating really terribly, or even if we're not eating terribly, for example, I am really sensitive to tomatoes. And, if you have a sensitivity like that, it could be creating inflammation in your body, which is affecting everything else, right? Everything is so interconnected. So right now I have just formed my own practice, Apto Physical Therapy, and it's going to be inside of Nurture, which is a well-care marketplace with a bunch of practitioners in it. Super awesome. And that'll be opening up in March.
And we're actually standing in the building right now, right?
Indeed.
Doing this
Yes.
podcast.
Yes.
So cool. Okay. So we're gonna take a couple leaps backwards, okay? Because I want to touch on a little bit of your childhood, and then we're gonna move forward and kind of get into the nitty gritty of some of what you're up to today, right? I want to ask you about, because you talked about how your parents very strongly encouraged that achievement within academics, right? Now, for me, like, academics was something that I had to do so that I could play sports. And so sports, for me personally, my childhood, sports was everything. That's all I cared about, literally, right? At some point, though, not through my parents, but just through my own kind of like, just as I was going like through puberty and just kind of growing up and trying to navigate, figure out who I was as an athlete, as a young person, right? Like there started to become, this internal turmoil of like performance anxiety, right? Like I would get so like just internally just like messed up, because it's like, man, I'm undefeated in the 1600 as a 7th grader, and I've got to stay undefeated, and I've got to work harder, and I got all this positive reinforcement because I was always one of the hardest workers, if not the hardest worker. And as young people, like wherever we kind of like get that positive reinforcement, whether it's sports, whether it's our looks or academics, whatever, like that's usually we're going to kind of keep chasing that, right? So what I'm trying to get at in terms of your parents really strongly encouraging that achievement within academics, did that ever burn you out? Did that ever really cause like some sort of like anxiety or angst within you as you were kind of growing up and going through your childhood?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that a lot of the positive reinforcement I got and, maybe love that I received came in the form of acknowledgement for my achievements, whether they were academic or even related to the equestrian stuff. And that definitely started to manifest as I got older. And I don't know how much you know about horses, but, obviously they're alive and they can really perceive your anxiety. And I started getting a lot of, anxiety, particularly surrounding like showing and competing in horseback riding, and ultimately ended up quitting when I was 16 because I kept having injuries because my horse at the time like did not trust me because I was so nervous, and had a couple of bad brain injuries and finally like stepped away. And that was a huge disappointment to my parents, I think, because not only had they made such sacrifices for me to be able to do this, participate in this really kind of expensive sport, but they donated all of their time had gone into this and driving me around the country. And I think that was the first experience I had of kind of like realizing like, I don't like this. I do this because my mom gets a lot of joy out of it. And my mom's very proud of me when I succeed and do well. And I think that was kind of the first step in me realizing, like, you got to do what makes you happy. And in terms of school, I think that when I had that time after undergraduate, which seems like a really late time to kind of come into your own, I realized that I was not learning at school for love of learning so much as I was for achievement. Like I could get great grades. I'm very lucky that I'm a great test taker, and really prided myself on that. But like, how much was I actually learning and thinking about things? Not a lot. So as I went to go study to do my entrance exams for PT school, it's like, yeah, all of that knowledge was still in there, but it was recall. It wasn't like I knew it because I had thought about it. I knew it because I'd memorized it. And I think that was a really interesting awareness for me. And so then when I went into PT school, I kind of shifted my attitude of like, I want to learn the things I want to learn. So to be quite honest, there were classes that I was like, I have no interest in this. And so I wouldn't really like devote a ton of energy to that because I realized like the things I want to learn are the things that I'm going to apply to being a practitioner later in life. So
now, okay, so I want to try to dig a little bit deeper in terms of kind of like that anxiety, because you just mentioned like, you know, it seems kind of late to be discovering yourself during your undergraduate, and I'm 32 and I'm still discovering myself, so it's all good, right? But just like at that time, like, because I think this is such a valuable you know, kind of like nugget within your story, and just like as humans, you know, I have the conversation with people all the time, like just the importance of like finding the foundation for our lives as individuals, right? Finding out like what sets our soul on fire, finding out what our purpose is and our calling and all that, because if we don't have that as human beings, like what do we have? So what was that kind of process, you know, as you kind of like got into college, you know, and you're kind of doing things because that's what was the expectation in terms of your parents, which there's nothing wrong. You already mentioned, like that's just, they wanted the best for you. And that's how my parents were, right? But at some point for me, just like you, like as we're growing up, like we have to figure out who we are. So what was that process, Amy, like for you in terms of like when you were kind of discovering yourself in your undergraduate, you mentioned, and kind of going through college, and what was like your mindset? How did you work through like, okay, like this is what my parents want, but this is what Amy wants. Like, what did that kind of look like in terms of the process?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a balance. Like, I think that I had to really take stock of what my strengths were, right? Like, being academically inclined is a strength. And I know that going to grad school can be a barrier for some people. And I think that I wanted to pick a career that would not only balance some strengths with some passions, and I really knew that I wanted, like I said, to help people. I really, really like love biomechanics more than anything. Like I love learning about how the body moves, why it moves that way. And to be quite honest, I mean, I could watch people walk and move around all day long and totally be into it.
That's cool. Wow, that's sweet.
So I think that it was just, I mean, there again, it's like such a cerebral way of like, okay, what are the things that I'm good at and what I like, and it seemed like that was the best fit. So I mean, it wasn't necessarily like a true passion at first. It was like still a very calculated, like I said, cerebral process choosing PT. I would say that in starting this practice in the last couple years, I've really come into my own in terms of realizing like, what does it feel like when I'm being my best self as a practitioner? And that meant not seeing as many patients as I was. So when you work in private practice and take insurance, unfortunately, it's a numbers game. And I mean, you're seeing people, I mean, I was seeing upwards of 52 people a week. And these are one-on-one sessions where you are with them for 45 minutes. And I did not have the capacity to help them, especially because in the state of Colorado, it's tricky to give any sort of nutrition information because it's outside of a scope of practice for a PT. So I felt like in a lot of ways, I was doing a disservice to my patients because I wasn't able to give them the treatment that they needed. And so in kind of coming up with the concept with Apto, where we're really looking at holistic, integrative wellness, like not having to prescribe to what insurance says they're going to reimburse, and coming up with a model that's really going to help people. That's what makes me feel really excited, because I know I'm going to be able to affect change. And in doing that, I'm going to be able to spend an hour and a half with people instead of being like, okay, thanks, see you later, I'll see you next week, and get people better in 4 weeks instead of seeing them for 3 months.
For sure. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna just completely dive into kind of like all things PT, and I want to talk about you being at NTP, some personal training, all that. So what you just kind of left off with in terms of like spending quality time with an individual, right? So, you know, I've had some other physical therapists on here, and one specifically, I know she, like, that's her focus, is like she was kind of like in the typical physical therapy realm, and then it's just like she wanted to spend that intimate quality time with an individual. And for me as a personal trainer, like, I absolutely love, and again, like most of my clients where I'm training at in Littleton are seniors, and I absolutely love that hour with those people because I get to listen to them. And a lot of times with seniors, sometimes I think they're paying more for just kind of like the friendship and just, you know, just kind of like, it's like, for some people, it's like their coffee time, right? Yeah. And it's just like, I get to listen, I get to, you know, hear their stories. Sometimes they repeat the same story 1,000 times, but it's just like, you get to kind of like step into their story. You get to step into their life. You kind of, and you also get to help them be healthier and things like that. And I love that intimate quality time as a personal trainer with my clients. So, just like you kind of talked about, kind of like the maybe the normal PT setting where it's like things are kind of rushed. And I think we see that in our medical system overall, right? In terms like you go see a doctor, you know, you're working with a nurse or a doctor's assistant or something. The doctor comes in, you know, talks to you for 5 minutes and they're gone, right? So just kind of expound a little bit more on why that doesn't work for you and why it's really important for you to, again, have that quality, intimate time with your patients. Like, again, why is that so valuable and important for you, and why would that maybe for some PTs that are listening to this that are maybe in the typical normal setting, why would you encourage them to maybe look at something else kind of like what you're doing?
Yeah. Well, and to give some context for listeners, I do a lot of pelvic floor physical therapy, so that's very intimate in nature anyways. And so even in a traditional PT setting, I want to just clarify that is one-on-one. But still it can feel rushed. So typically, a patient that I will see that comes in with something going on with their pelvic floor has seen upwards of 3, maybe, sometimes up to 10 practitioners that have all said, nothing's wrong, or we can't find anything wrong. And so for those people, they've maybe been dealing with their symptoms for so long that we've had so much time to build these beliefs of, oh my God, they can't find anything wrong. They can't find anything wrong. It must be really bad. It must be really bad. And these people develop these stories that end up making their symptoms worse. We know that fear in particular can lead to a lot of pelvic floor tension and guarding. That's some muscle tissue that we have that is really kind of vulnerable, right? And so a lot of people that I have seen, or that I see with pelvic floor dysfunction that's been going on for any extended period of time, are really guarded there. So it's obviously important to be able to develop rapport with those people, just because they need to trust you to do that type of intimate work. But more than anything, I think it's really important to be able to dig into, like, what does their day look like? When did this start? What makes it better? What makes it worse? What do you think's going on? I can't think of the last time I went to a doctor. I don't think it's ever happened where the doctor said, well, what do you think is going on? And that's just such a really important question, I think, to ask people. And then to say, you know, what does recovery look like for you? How are you going to know that you've recovered? Because maybe they don't even know that. But for them to define that, it might mean for some women, like, that I can have pain-free intercourse with my husband. That's how I'm going to know I've recovered. Or I'm going to be able to do double unders without being incontinent. But sometimes these people that have pain all the time, like, don't really know what does it mean to be recovered, because they've been in pain for years. So really getting that expectation set up is important. And then being able to look at what's going on in their life. I think that there's more often than not, when something starts, especially with pelvic floor, it's not typically traumatic. Like, certainly birth trauma, like if somebody had a really bad delivery, that's an injury, right?
Right. Yeah.
But a lot of people will come in, oh, this started all of a sudden. Okay, well, what was happening in your life? Like, just take me back. Tell me what was going on in your life. Well, it was a bad time in my life. My dad just died. Aha. So we now are really, I think a lot of PTs are starting to realize that there is so much of the psychosocial aspect. Most PTs practicing today have heard the word biopsychosocial approach 100 times, but so many PTs are just bio. Okay, let's look at the strength of your core and your posture and this and this and this. And we bombard people with information about all the biological things that are wrong. And then send them on their way. And now we've just given them information that scares them. Okay, your glutes are weak, your abs aren't working. You've got a disc bulge here. Okay, well, we're going to give you some exercises. And people leave and they're like, oh my God.
Overwhelmed, right?
Overwhelmed.
Yeah.
This is worse than I thought it was.
And they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it.
Yes.
Right.
So a lot of times I will just have people write their pain story for me. That's their homework for their first visit. Write a little story for me. And in fact, one of my most recent blog posts was a story that a patient had written for me, and it was interesting. I think that her writing the story out was so cathartic. She did it at the very end of her treatment, and she's been fine.
Yeah.
Now, I also think that's a fine line, right? Because I think that, especially when people have been dealing with stuff for a long time, they're like, oh my gosh, here we go again, and I have to go over all of this again. But I think that if you take the time, the very first time you meet with somebody, get a thorough story, take notes, ask questions, then you're not going to have to ask them to repeat it, because it's the repeating of things that can be so traumatic. And if you give them space to tell their story, to give you their perspective, to give you their values, it's important to me that I don't have to do exercises for a half an hour a day. Fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Everybody has values, and their values are going to affect whether or not they get better, right? So I think that those are kind of the big things in terms of why I need more time with people, because I need to get to know them and get to understand that kind of psychosocial component, because without it, I mean, my manual skills might be great, my exercises might be awesome, but they're never going to get better, because that fear could be there, even if it's an acute injury, right? Let's use my example. I herniated a disc working out a year ago. Without me taking time to really look at the fear and my beliefs around that injury, I would have never gone back to working out. I know that my disc healed. I know that I've gotten my strength up, that I've improved my mechanics. Those things are all there, but my pain would still be there if I didn't address those beliefs that I had. Right.
So you're taking that holistic approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I believe that's the if you truly want to help somebody change or heal and all that, like there's no other way. In my estimation, even with personal training, I talk about my 4 pillars of the health foundation, and I cover that with my potential clients because it's just it's just so important. Now, for people that are, and even for myself, right? But for people that are listening, just explain a little bit more in terms of the pelvic floor and just kind of that whole area that you are specifically working on. And then once you kind of explain that, just talk about I want to talk more about pelvic health, because that's something that when I listen to different podcasts, especially different powerlifting and lifting weights and stuff, I'm starting to hear more people talk about the pelvic floor and how do you strengthen that. Because some I know some females when they deadlift or something they'll pee their pants, and from my understanding that comes from a weak pelvic floor. So just what is the pelvic floor, and then how do people kind of keep that area healthy and strengthen it and kind of all those things?
Sure. So I could talk about this for 3 hours, so I'll keep it as simple as I can. We all have pelvic floors.
Right, yep.
It's basically muscle tissue that runs from your pubic bone back to your tailbone. It goes all the way out to your sit bones. And it's got a few functions. One is that it stabilizes your pelvis, because your pelvis is not fixed or fused. We've got our SI joints, we've got our pubic joint. We've got the joint between the tailbone and the sacrum. So that muscle is helping to support the pelvis,
Right.
And stabilize. It also is supporting our organs. So in women, we've got vaginal canal, so the uterus is there,
Yeah.
and then bladder and rectum, obviously, in all people. So that muscle tissue is helping to suspend that muscle and to support it. So the pelvic floor, think about a boat in a dock that like it's really fluid and can respond to things. If a boat was in a dry dock, things would like fall, the boat would just fall over, right? So it's kind of like some buoyancy.
Okay.
It also has sphincteric support, so it houses our urethral and anal sphincter, so it helps us maintain continence when it contracts, and then it needs to be able to relax so that we can go to the bathroom. There's obviously sexual function in that, and then there's also some lymph drainage component to that.
Okay.
Where things go wrong is that the muscle tissue can either become too weak or it can become too tight, or both. And more often than not, in my athletes that are nulliparous, so they haven't had kids, and male and female, right? So this can happen. Men can have pelvic floor dysfunction as well. I typically find that pelvic floor dysfunction develops because we're not regulating our intra-abdominal pressure appropriately. So if you think about our abdominal cavity as kind of like a tube of toothpaste, we've got our diaphragm at the top that we breathe with. So when we take a big, deep breath in, our diaphragm drops down. And when we're bracing for a lift, right, we're really familiar with that because when we like brace and it's like a piston coming down. Our abdominals and our lumbar multifidus form kind of the walls of that tube of toothpaste, and then we've got this sling at the bottom. So if we're not bracing appropriately when we lift, if we're not breathing appropriately throughout the day, or if we're holding our tummies tight all the time, like I often see gymnasts that just like hold their bellies in all the time, and they develop pelvic floor dysfunction because now we've increased the pressure in the abdomen. Think about a tube of toothpaste. All that pressure is going down toward the pelvic floor, and our bodies are intelligent. They recognize that pressure and they think, oh, we don't want to leak. Let's get really tight. And so the muscle becomes perpetually tight. And just like any muscle, it needs to be able to contract and then relax, right? So bicep strength is not formed by holding your bicep isometrically. We don't train isometrically because that's not functional, right?
Yeah.
So more often than not, the pelvic floor learns to live in this like kind of half contracted state, and then you go to do something and the muscle fails. So when a woman has incontinence, it's the muscle failing. You know, it's too exhausted from being too tight. We call that active insufficiency when a muscle is too tight to be strong. Now, could it just be weak? Totally. But there's really no way of knowing without seeing a pelvic floor PT. So that's kind of like the nuts and bolts of it. Things that can also happen besides incontinence is pelvic organ prolapse. So this can happen in men or women where your organs kind of fall out of your pelvis, so to speak. So men and women can develop rectal prolapse, where your rectum prolapses out of your anal opening, which is terrible.
Yeah, I don't want that to happen.
Women, because we have an extra opening for our vaginal canal, all three of those organs can fall out. So that is obviously something that we want to prevent. That can happen a lot in like power lifters or people that are chronically constipated, bearing down all the time, that sort of thing. And then we have people that aren't athletes and just are like chronically tense people, and those are typically the people that have pain because the muscle is just tight all the time and compressing nerves, less blood flow to the area, and so then they have pain when they sit, they have pain when they go to the bathroom, they have pain with sexual function, that sort of thing. So pelvic floor dysfunction can present in a variety of different ways. The other thing I really love to touch on is that women and men who get hip injuries, especially labral tears or hip impingement, can have a lot of pelvic floor dysfunction. So there's one of the muscles that actually forms or is one of our deep hip rotators as part of our pelvic floor, and that can be a missing link in a lot of people's hip rehab. So I've started working a lot in women with their labral tear recoveries because there, some pain still lingers, and typically pelvic floor is the missing piece.
All right. So how does outside of having like chronic pain and then like going to see a physical therapist or something, how does somebody just strengthen that pelvic floor and just take care of that area?
Sure. I think the biggest thing is that people need to realize that a muscle needs to be able to relax. So the pelvic floor is both slow and fast twitch muscle, so it needs to be able to contract quickly and relax between reps, but it also needs to be able to contract and hold. So you should be able to contract your pelvic floor. It should feel like you're trying to withhold gas or urine. We all kind of know what it's like, what it feels like to hold gas in.
Yeah, it's not fun. It sucks.
So
this can be painful.
Yes, it can be painful. I don't encourage people to hold their gas in as an aside, but that's how we contract that muscle. So we should be able to hold it theoretically for 10 seconds. We should also be able to do 10 really fast contractions. I don't have anybody do, more than 30 Kegels a day ever. And really and truly, unless somebody is really just weak, am I assigning that many pelvic floor contractions. The best thing we can do to keep our pelvic floor healthy is to learn to breathe appropriately. That's the most important thing. So I never encourage Kegels unless you've actually seen a practitioner that's evaluated that pelvic floor muscle.
Okay, so expound on the breathing aspect of things, because that's something else I think just within the last several years within the health and fitness industry, it's just exploded, right? Like I've had, and you probably know her. She's her name's actually Amy Morrison. Do you know who that is? Okay, yeah. So she was like one of the first guests I've had on, and she's a counselor, but she does the XPT and breathing is a huge part of that. And so I think she's probably like one of the first people that I really came across that was talking on the podcast about breathing. And I know she's on her social media, she does an amazing job of kind of talking about that type of stuff. So just talk about the importance of breathing, and maybe because I know just from listening to a lot of different people talk about it, there's different breathing techniques. So explain the importance of breathing, and then maybe what are a couple techniques that the listeners can kind of start practicing immediately after they listen to this.
Sure. I think that most people need to be able to just control their breath in different ways. I think people that run anxious or people that brace through their abdomen breathe apically, which means they're breathing using their accessory muscles in their upper chest. So you see them and their chest is rising and falling rapidly. As a society, I think that women get used to pulling their bellies in, and men too, to an extent, right? And when we do that,
I know I do.
It's really hard to breathe with a stomach that can actually soften and expand. So I like to be able to let people breathe and really feel their stomach expand. So when you're taking a breath in, you should really be able to feel your stomach rise.
Yeah.
And then as you exhale, it passively falls. So one thing that I'll have people do is lie on their tummy and have a hand on their chest and a hand on their belly, and just try to see which hand moves when you take a breath in. Because really and truly, I think I'll have people come in and say, I'm not breathing correctly because I saw something online. If you're upright, you're breathing. You're accomplishing the goal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Are there better ways than others to breathe? Yeah, sure there are. But when we're at rest, we want to be able to tap into that diaphragmatic breathing, that deep belly breath. So again, lying on your back, feeling your stomach rise as you inhale, passively letting it fall as you exhale. Similarly, I like people to be able to really let their rib cage expand outward, because that's one of our movements of that rib cage. So just really tapping into could we control our breath in different ways?
Okay, cool. Okay, so I would like to talk about the nutrition side of things.
Sure.
I've had quite a few NTPs on the podcast, nutrition therapy practitioners. So I kind of want you I'm going to let you just take it and run with it. But let's just talk about the importance of nutrition, just obviously in terms of overall health, but just maybe tie it in with some of that, you mentioned it earlier, just with chronic pain, and maybe, some of those people that you, on a regular basis, you're seeing coming in with the knee pain, the back pain, hip pain, all that. So, you don't really need to explain, the importance of nutrition for overall health, because most people that are going to be listening to this get that. But so just talk about how does nutrition tie in or play in with chronic pain, and how do you in your practice then kind of incorporate or educate people in terms of nutrition?
Sure. In terms of chronic pain, I think something to really be mindful of, the two big points that I guess I always educate my clients on. If somebody has signs of leaky gut, it's going to mean more inflammation in your body, right? Because we know that the lining of our gut is single cellular. What leaky gut means is that those tight junctions between those cells have been compromised. So food particles that aren't digested can then get absorbed into the blood, and then our body recognizes those as foreign bodies, and we have an inflammatory response as our body attacks them. So, I might have somebody that is doing everything in the book for their pain, doing their exercises, doing this, doing that, but they're still having some inflammation, or they're not healing appropriately. If we really look at their diet, and if they're eating a diet high in gluten, in particular, gluten produces protein zonulin, and that's what's breaking those tight junctions. So typically what I will say to people is, I know you didn't come in here for nutrition, but I need you to hold space for me to give you my integrative approach. Is that okay? And I kind of let them guide me in terms of whether or not they're actually okay with that, because some people are like, nah. And then they find a different PT because
you're not their flavor, right?
Yeah, not their flavor. But really, I think, again, providing education on things that can be inflammatory. And I really hone into leaky gut on that, because I think that from an inflammatory process, that's huge for people. And then for my really upregulated, chronically stressed people, I've really got to start to look at insulin resistance. We know that people that have chronically high cortisol levels develop insulin resistance. So we got to get your sugar intake under control. That's kind of like a conversation that can be hard to have with people, especially if they're walking in for PT thinking like, I'm just going to be looking at their back and that's it. They're not expecting to look at diet. And I also think that we get so defensive when it comes to our diet, because it's like we think that we're going to be judged for it. Like, listen, I eat sugar. I do.
So I like ice cream, man. Yeah. Ice cream's good. That's all it is, sugar.
Like having to have that conversation with people of like, this doesn't necessarily have to be a complete lifestyle change. But if you want to truly get to the root of your issues, we've got to at least address the other things going on. And along those lines, I realize that this isn't nutrition or PT. Sleep hygiene is a huge component in all of that.
Talk about it. Keep going. Yeah,
I mean, those are my three things that I tell people. Like, we're going to look at your physical body. I guess that's 4 things. Your belief system. We're going to look at what you're eating, and we're going to look at how you're sleeping. Because if one of those things is off, you're not going to get better. You might feel a little bit better, but we're not going to get you your very best.
For sure. Yeah.
I don't care what anybody says. If you aren't sleeping well or you're not sleeping enough, you're not going to heal.
So I want you to expound on sleep hygiene, because that's something else that's starting to become more, out there in the universe and social media and fitness and health space. Talk about, obviously, most people that are going to be listening to this, they understand sleep is important, but you mentioned sleep hygiene. What is sleep hygiene? So
sleep hygiene means limiting your exposure to lights. We've heard about that so much, but your body can't make its natural melatonin if it's exposed to light. So that's why we can't fall asleep at 5 o'clock in the afternoon when the sun is out like it is right now, unless we're totally exhausted, because our body is not producing that melatonin to help us fall asleep. So having a routine of, no screen time, and something that signals to your body that it's time to wind down. I know that a lot of people's morning routine is to do meditation or deep breathing. For me, that's what signals it's time for me to go to bed, as I do a little bit of breath work. I try to do it for 10 minutes, and by the time I fall asleep doing it.
That's great, yeah.
So, having that kind of routine, and we talked about this at the very beginning, having consistent sleep-wake times is huge. Our bodies really like to have that consistency. So going to bed within an hour range most nights is going to be instrumental. And, so in terms of sleep hygiene, we also want to think about not having a lot of distractors in the room, not dogs in the bed.
That's for you, Colorado people.
I know. My dog is mad at me.
You might have somebody get after you for saying that here in Colorado.
It's true. But
don't say anything bad about dogs or animals.
I know. And listen, my dog would love to sleep in bed.
I don't know how people do it though. Honestly, people that I know, their dog's in their bed. I'm like, dude, I sleep well, but I'll wake up pretty easily.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So speak on that, because a lot of people are going to be listening to this. They've got dogs. Their dogs are in the bed. Why shouldn't somebody have their dog sleeping with them in their bed?
Well, I mean, I think just the potential of being woken up, right? The most important thing about sleep is that we get these REM cycles in. And if you get interrupted in the middle of a REM cycle, and those typically can be around 90 minutes, give or take, and they're pretty consistent person to person. There's some individuality in that. But, like, let's say you're about to get into your REM sleep and your dog wakes you up. Well, you're not going to just fall right back into where you were. Your whole sleep pattern is going to be interrupted, and it's like you start back over. Mm-hmm. So, if you've got a dog waking you up 2-3 times in the middle of the night, you might not actually be getting a lot of good quality sleep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to step back into nutrition just for a moment here. So you mentioned gluten. What are some other foods? I know dairy is one of them, things like that. But just kind of go through the list if you don't mind, Amy, in terms of like some of the foods that are more likely to be food allergies or food sensitivities for people.
Sure. Certainly, we already talked about gluten, grains, sugar. Dairy is a big one. I really like to think about the quality. Let me take a step back and say that I'm not anti-plant-based diet. We all need to eat more plants, but I think we really have to be focusing on the quality of the plants we eat because it's the pesticides.
I like your style. You're going like against the Colorado way.
I know people are gonna.
It's good though.
I mean,
it's good.
Okay,
I agree.
Okay.
No, I'm saying that's great. Go for it because that's everybody kind of like whether it's Colorado, whether it's your little group of friends, like it's so easy for us as human beings just to kind of get sucked in with what everybody else is doing. And then it's like, like this athlete, is now plant-based and plant-powered and all that, so I've got to do it. Well, that might not be the best way for your body to eat, because I've tried to, take all these vegetables and put them in my smoothie, and like the fiber content, like you want to talk about like gas and just like messing up my digestion, like it messes me up. Yeah. I'm like, well, wait a minute, but these people are saying I should eat all these plants, and then I should be eating meat, and it's like, so I'm encouraging you to just keep talking about that, keep going that direction, and I love it because you live out. I mean, you're a native, so it's like we drive a Subaru. We were vegetarians, there's just these things right, that me being a transplant, it's like I look, I'm like, oh, that's a typical Colorado.
Yeah, right.
But it's just all in good nature. I love Colorado, obviously, but again, we get sucked in, so that's why I'm just like I'm saying amen because I don't hear a lot of people. Going in this direction, so keep going.
I've got a lot to say about that.
So I want you to say it, and I want you to take as long as you want because it needs to be heard.
I think that the big thing that I worry about with plant-based diets is obviously protein deficits. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the information that is out there right now is a little bit skewed. So there was obviously a documentary out that literally changed the game. But a couple of my big points about this is what I tell everybody that watch that and we're really skewed. One, they talk about animal proteins being carcinogens. Mm-hmm. That research came from a study where they gave rats heme iron. They didn't give rats meat, they injected heme iron into them. And that caused cancer. Mm-hmm. We're not injecting heme iron into ourselves as people. So I don't think that we can make that jump in terms of the research. The other thing that drives me absolutely bananas and is a huge misconception in the health world is that meat intake is correlated with heart disease. Right. Here's how it works. Our blood vessels are super smooth. The lumen of the vessel, think about like a hose, no cracks in it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. When we have uncontrolled insulin levels, so high blood sugar spikes, insulin comes in, that creates little tiny lesions, microvascular lesions in the lumen of our blood vessels. That allows bacteria to then go into the blood vessel, and then there's an inflammatory response and foam cells are created, and those foam cells calcify and those become plaques. Mm-hmm. And now we have narrowing of the lumen, and then fat can stick to that. I should have mentioned that the cholesterol is actually sticking to that, and that's what's forming those plaque cells. But if we regulate our blood sugar, those microvascular lesions aren't going to happen. There's not going to be buildup that way. So that is kind of a misconception. Yeah, like we need to have the fat in order to create those plaques. But if you have really great insulin regulation, you're not going to have that issue.
Right.
So in terms of educating people with that, I typically am really increasing people's protein intake and really looking at their protein sources. If it's a value to them that they remain vegetarian, we'll work around it. But things like pea protein can be very inflammatory to people. So, and it varies person to person. We're all very bio-individual in how we respond to things. But I do think that more often than not, we need to be getting more protein in our diets. And yes, I think that do we need to eat more plants? Yeah, we all need to eat more plants, but what we don't need to eat more of are plants that are covered in herbicides and pesticides, because that is the biggest thing in terms of endocrine disruption. So if you want to screw up your hormone system, eat produce that's not organically grown and covered in herbicides. That's going to be a huge detriment to your health. You're better off not eating that stuff. Sometimes, I tell all my clients, like, look at that dirty dozen list for the foods that you really you shouldn't be eating unless they're organic, and don't eat those. If you can't get them organic, don't eat them. I'd rather you not eat them at all, because we can get those nutrients other ways.
Okay, why is protein so important? You mentioned you're usually working with people on increasing their protein. Why protein specifically? Why is that so important?
Well, because protein is how we get our amino acids, and amino acids are kind of the building blocks of all of our cells, right? Especially if we're wanting to heal and you have a deficiency in amino acids, especially essential ones that your body can't make, where else are you going to get them? Now, we can be really diligent about food combining. There are ways around it, but it's going to mean, okay, we're combining this food with this food, and you're going to be having to be very specific with what you eat, what days.
Right.
Whereas, like, if I could just be like, could you eat a piece of chicken today? Do you think you could do that? It's just a lot easier sometimes.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so you mentioned there was something on your Instagram that I came across, and it was about eggs specifically, right? You said something about you like to eat eggs, eat a lot of them, and from my understanding, the research that I've done, like the egg protein, it's one of the best digestible or something like that. I mean, it's a high quality protein, right? Okay, so you talked about on the Instagram in terms of like labeling for eggs. Yeah. You've got like certified humane, you've got organic, you've got free range, you've got caged, all these different terms. So kind of in lieu of that Instagram post, I wrote this down. I was hoping we could touch on it, and it naturally came to be here. Just explain kind of like if somebody enjoys eating eggs and things like that, what is like the best, what's the best label, or what are some of the labels that you should be looking at in terms of the eggs that you buy?
Yeah, the first thing I always like to point out is that if somebody says that your chickens are vegetarian fed, like, no, chickens eat bugs. So just don't ever fall for that label. I personally go for organic, certified organic, and then certified humane. Okay. Just because the chickens are living better lives. If they're not stressed, they're going to be a little bit happier. And then I prefer pastured. If you can't do that, free range at least means that they've got some access to being outside. Cage free doesn't mean that they're outside. Cage free means that they might be in a coop without a cage. So the highest quality would be pastured, certified organic, certified humane. Yeah, and pastured, they have, correct me if I'm wrong, they have at least 108 square feet to roam, and they're kind of like in their natural habitat and eating what they're supposed to be eating and all that. Yeah, like correct? Grass and bugs. Yeah. Not corn. Not Monsanto corn. Right. Now, from my research, like, not only is the protein with eggs very important and a high quality protein, but also the cholesterol is very important. But just eating a whole egg, because back in the day, probably when we were growing up, it was like you eat the egg white, stay away from a whole egg because of the cholesterol and all that craziness, nonsense. But just share with the listeners why it's important to have whole eggs in their diet if that's something they're not sensitive to and they're able to eat it. Cholesterol, we have to have cholesterol to make all of our hormones. Mm-hmm. And so we can't cut it all out of our diet. And a lot of times, like, the bad cholesterol that we're thinking of is actually not coming from things like egg yolks. Yes, there's cholesterol in there, but we actually need some cholesterol in our body. We want to be avoiding, hydrogenated oils, that sort of thing. That's where the danger comes from.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so I wanna touch on you mentioned kind of like you're kind of branching out, you're kind of moving in your own direction in terms of like your own practice and everything. So I want you to talk about just kind of like that entrepreneurship, kind of like the process, because for a lot of people, it can kind of be a scary thing, and there's a lot of navigation. We kind of all, entrepreneurship is something else through social media that's been very, glamorized, and everybody is kind of a new cool thing, right? So talk about just the process of kind of like where you started as a physical therapist and the process you're kind of at now in opening up your own practice, kind of like behind the scenes of maybe some things that you've had to kind of overcome or work through in terms of maybe some fears. Just talk about kind of like what entrepreneurship means to you and just the direction you really want to go as a practitioner, as a physical therapist on your own.
Yeah. I did like the very traditional thing. I got a job right out of school with a practice that was pretty in line with what I wanted to do. Worked my way up, was the clinic director, had a good salary, but was burned out. And it took me, I'm not going to lie, this has been the hardest thing I've ever done because I love security. And, we've talked about I love achievement. So being able to be the senior PT and the clinic director of the practice I was at was like, oh, great. And at that time I was 30 years old. It's like, okay, well, now what? And I think when I really took stock of what I wanted my life to look like, what I wanted my interaction with patients to look like, I just had to really trust that I was going to be able to make the changes that I wanted to make in people's lives, and I could do that better doing it the way I wanted to do it. To be honest, it took me, kind of putting my head down and saving for a few years. This kind of like came into my mind probably a little over a year and a half ago. And I'm very lucky to have a supportive partner who I never want to have to rely on financially, but that, Tyler, if you listen to this, thank you for being such a wonderful supporter. Not only like knowing that I have that back fall with him, but just like having somebody that really believes in me. That's been huge. I've worked on him. I've helped him through a lot of gut issues, and I think that him just telling me like, yeah, you like are going to help so many people. You just have to put yourself out there, because right now, when I was at that other practice, I was working upwards of 50 hours a week and only getting paid for 40 of those hours. And I wasn't giving my best. I had no extra time to really foster what I wanted to do. And I think I just got sick and tired of feeling like my hands were tied. So that's been a big challenge. I think the biggest challenge for me is that I am not business minded. In fact, when I went into PT school, one of the things I said is I'm never going to open my own practice. And also in PT school, they don't teach you any of this stuff. Furthermore, I think I'm trying to navigate what does it mean to be an out-of-network provider. So I'm not going to be in network with a lot of insurances, and that's going to be a huge barrier for people getting care. But it's also because big insurance payers are not going to reimburse for the services that I'm giving. And so recognizing that, like, okay, the people that come to you are going to really want to be there. Not saying like, well, I guess I'll go to PT because my doctor said and I only have a $15 copay.
Right.
These people are going to be devoted, and I'm going to be able to give them what they need, what they want, what they expect. So getting over that has been a challenge. And then every piece of logistics behind this. My website, everything has been so new to me. I am so blessed to have created a network of people that have amazing skill sets. A friend of mine created my logo for me and helped me with a business card, and really networking. There's so many awesome people in Denver. So
for sure,
really reaching out to those people has been key in getting me up and going. And then Nikki Doherty is one of the founders of Nurture, and she's the one that got me in here. And I think that this opportunity in and of itself was, it's the opportunity of a lifetime for me. And so I can't thank her enough for that.
Beautiful. Now, where do you, like, when you kind of like daydream and you're just kind of like by yourself and thinking about, you know, your own practice, your own business, like, what's kind of the dream? What is kind of like that long-term vision that you might have for the future in terms of your own practice?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'd love to have a pretty thriving practice where I'm getting people in and out in like 4 to 6 sessions. Mm-hmm. That's my goal. Big picture, I am hoping to apply for a grant in the next 5 years where with a couple of my colleagues that work in kind of different areas of health and fitness where we kind of come up with a protocol for chronic pain that is super truly integrative. Exercise, nutrition, PT, social work, and coming up with like a true program for people, because I really think that in our lifetime we're going to see opioids become a thing of the past. And there are so many people that are reliant upon narcotic medications for pain management, and we have got to have something in place to support those people when they come off of those medications, because I think that's inevitable.
Cool. Okay, so we're going to start heading towards the finish line here. Amy, I do, because you're a personal trainer, and I know you're still teaching some classes at a gym here in Denver. And I'm a personal trainer, and again, going back to my story a little bit, a lot of my current clients are seniors, so they're coming to see the personal trainer, but a lot of them through their insurance, because of different things, they're also connected with a physical therapist. Either they're going to see the physical therapist and they're coming to see me, the personal trainer, or they just got, their insurance isn't paying any longer for the physical therapist, but they've been there, right? So I hear physical therapist almost every day with my clients. So for me, my goal always is, how can all of us within the health and fitness industry work together to make these people that are coming to see us, pain-free, better, healthier, all the things, right? And obviously I've had quite a few PTs on my podcast, and in my network there's physical therapists. So how do you see the gap? How do we bridge the gap between a personal trainer and a physical therapist? How can we work together to make our clients and our patients better? Yeah,
I think that's a great question. I think that is key, because you're going to be the one watching these people move, right? And in an ideal world, I think that PTs forget that the goal of PT is to rehabilitate somebody and to transition them out. And so I always ask my clients, like, do you work with a personal trainer? If so, could I collaborate with them? And just give that person some information about, like, hey, watch when he goes to hip hinge, he tends to round his back. Those sorts of things. Or, I really don't want to see this person doing this, this, and this. Because it's so much more accessible and realistic for somebody to work with a personal trainer once we've really got them moving appropriately and pretty much pain-free. That's the role of the personal trainer moving forward, to get them stronger. You're going to see them way more than a PT should be seeing them. Of course. Realistically, I think that a lot of PTs have fallen into this model of like, oh no, we can do what the personal trainer does, and that's not the point of PT. The point of PT is to rehabilitate people, not to personal train them. So I want to get people better as quickly as I can, so that I can send them to you. Right. So I think that it takes reaching, or like using the patient as a middleman, right? Hey, can you give me your PT's information? This is a great thing. Whenever a personal trainer calls me, I'm like thrilled. Oh, awesome. I can tell you, look out for this, this, and this with this person. Or I really want to see her doing this. Really encourage her to do this. She's going to tell you she can't do it. She can do it. Because the patients are also really good at not giving one of us the full story, right?
Yeah, they're just like little kids, right?
Yeah.
One goes to mom, one goes to dad.
Totally. So I think that, like, if we can be in communication and collaborative, the people are going to get much better. For sure. Now, is it hard for you as a personal trainer and doing some fitness classes and things like that? Is it sometimes hard for you, kind of like the practitioner in you, and then like when you're in a gym, I'm sure you're probably you're a stickler for form, but when you're teaching like classes, like, we got to be real. Like, there's only so much you can do. Totally. But the practitioner in you, like when you see something like moving wrong or whatever, or what have you, is it kind of hard for you sometimes to hold back, or do you really try to do the best you can to like approach that person maybe after class and
help them out? How do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah, in the recent past, I've kind of changed my mindset because I've realized that there's no such thing as perfect movement.
Of course.
Perfect movement is the movement that people can do without pain. I recently took a course that was really, really amazing where we watched a girl sumo deadlift 305 with terrible form. And the person that was running the course let her keep doing it. And he was like, I'm letting her do this. I mean, rounded back, like everybody, the PTs in the crowd are bracing themselves. And we're like, why are you letting this woman do this? Well, she's not having any pain. It's not like she starts with good form and loses her form, which is what an injury, that's what precedes an injury. She bends over with really crappy mechanics, and she keeps those crappy mechanics the whole time. And if she can deadlift 305 with mechanics like that, maybe that's how she does it. And so that has been kind of a challenge for me. So I've really tried to take a step back. I give people as best cues as I can, and then I'll touch base with them after class. Hey, does that bother you when you do that? Instead of saying, you really don't do this right, or hey, can I show you how to swing a kettlebell? I'll say, how does it feel when you swing a kettlebell? Or how does it feel when you do a deadlift? Do you ever feel that in your back? Let me just show you a different thing, different way of doing it. Because people are pretty good at self-monitoring, and if something hurts, especially in group exercise, they typically modify. People are not, at least in Denver, I think people have kind of taken control of that, right? And if something doesn't feel good, they either don't do it or they modify it. And then if I see them modifying it, I'll ask. If I see bad form, I will try to touch base and just be like, how did that feel today? And if it felt okay, I'll say, I'd really maybe like to see you try this, just because I would hate for you to keep doing it this way and hurt yourself. But I also don't want to induce fear, because I think that's been a lesson that I've been trying to incorporate lately. Instead of saying like, you really do those kettlebell swings wrong, they're probably going to get in their own head and not want to swing a kettlebell anymore.
For sure. That's a great perspective. Okay, one thing I'd love to ask you. There's a lot of misinformation in health and fitness and all that, right? And there's some things like maybe you watch a YouTube video or you see something on Instagram, somebody posts, and it's like, wow, that's just legitimately idiotic, right? So with kind of like that caveat, what's one thing kind of currently in the health and fitness space, wellness, all that type of stuff, right? That just really boils your water, and you want to see it stopped or changed immediately.
Can I have two?
You can have 100.
Okay, well, I have 100, but I'm only going to give two. My first one is diastasis or diastasis recti ab separation. There's so much misinformation about how to fix it, what you can and cannot do, and it depends. It depends. If you don't see somebody that gets their hands on you and sees what you're actually doing, there's no way of knowing. There's no way of generalizing and saying, okay, you've got this ab separation, you can never do a sit-up again. That is like something that I see all over the internet, especially like in women's fitness right now. There's so much fear around diastasis. Well, I can't do a sit-up. I'll have people come to my class. I can't do a plank. I have a diastasis. Well, has anybody watched you do one and gotten their hands on your abs to see what your abs are doing? I think the way we use our abs is the most variable thing, person to person. Everybody has a different strategy to brace their core. And so the diastasis stuff that's online, you pay $200 for a program, that drives me bananas because everybody is different. And I really don't think that you can use a course where we're just doing breathing to fix a diastasis. That might work for some people. I would say most people it doesn't. And certainly saying you can never do a sit-up again is not realistic. Somebody's going to have to sit up in bed. You're going to have to get up off the floor someday. Saying you can never do a sit-up again drives me crazy. And then we already kind of touched on this, plant-based diets. Yeah. Right, kind of boil my water. And let me tell you that I was vegan for the better part of my 20s. Really? Okay. My early 20s, early to mid 20s, all the way through PT school, and then the irony was I moved to Chicago and got exposed to good food. And that's when the veganism went out the window. And not I always kind of felt like, yeah, I just have a bad belly. Like I get bloated and I'm tired in the afternoon. And I wasn't eating like a ton of sugar. I was definitely eating a lot of grains, but I wasn't eating any protein. And so once I left the vegan world and even the vegetarian world behind, never looked back.
Okay, I do want to kind of go back to like postpartum, because that's something else that I wanted to definitely touch on, because I know you're an expert in that area. So like, you know, after you know, somebody has a child and stuff, kind of like what are the steps, and even actually I want to back it up, because I hear different things. So somebody's pregnant. What can their exercise protocol look like? And I remember earlier in our conversation you said something about somebody being pregnant and they're doing muscle ups, and hey, like, go for it if it's not causing anything. But just generally speaking, you know, I know every individual is different, right? But generally speaking, like the exercise protocol, what can people kind of do? And I'm asking, you know, even for myself as a personal trainer, just generally speaking, like what can ladies do when they're pregnant in terms of exercise, and then like after they have their child, what is kind of the process of you know, ramping back up that exercise if they were an avid exerciser before they got pregnant?
Sure. So the current recommendations from the American College of Gynecology is that if a woman was doing an exercise before becoming pregnant, it's generally safe for her to continue as long as she's not having any symptoms. So symptoms meaning pain or urinary incontinence or just something that's out of the ordinary. The things that we want to keep in mind are that we don't want to initiate something that a woman has not done before becoming pregnant. So if a woman never got under a barbell before she was pregnant, it's not time to get her underweight while she's pregnant. Women do have changes in blood volume. They have changes in how they regulate their core temperature, so they're going to get hotter faster. Certainly as the baby starts to get bigger, there's going to be decreased volume, so they're going to go get short of breath sooner. And then one thing that I don't think gets enough recognition is that the hormone relaxin is released in the first trimester of pregnancy. And why this matters, it's particularly important in women that are really loose at baseline, so those hypermobile women that we see. Relaxin allows all of our ligaments to become extra elastic. So that hormone is spiking during the first trimester. It kind of reaches its peak and levels off around 17 weeks and then stays consistent through the duration of pregnancy. This matters for women that like can't get or are able to get into deeper ranges than maybe they were before they were pregnant. So if somebody couldn't do the splits before they were pregnant, I don't want them doing the splits when they're pregnant because they're like, oh, now I can, because you're going to be compromising that connective tissue. So I just have them be mindful of a range. If this range wasn't available to you before becoming pregnant, let's not push our limits there. So that can be, you know, useful in yoga and the depth of a squat, that sort of thing. In terms of postpartum, you know, delivery is a pretty major thing. And so I typically say, go see a physical therapist at 6 weeks postpartum. That is standard of care in Europe, in fact, for a woman to go see a PT postpartum. Some women have super easy deliveries. Some women have really major tearing, and grade 2 tearing and above is actually tearing into your pelvic floor muscle. I always say to people, if you tore your rotator cuff, wouldn't you rehab it? I mean, it's muscle. If you're tearing muscle, we should probably rehab it before jumping back into things.
That's a legit point. Yeah.
Prolonged pushing. I mean, sometimes I'll see women that say that they pushed for 8 hours. Well, that's a pretty traumatic thing that happened to your body, and you probably need to be assessed by a professional before you get back to doing what you're doing. And then, of course, a cesarean delivery. Cesarean deliveries require some rehabilitation because you're getting, you know, the loss of integrity of your entire abdominal wall. So there are going to be things that are different for you than somebody that had a pretty standard vaginal delivery. 6 weeks is typically around the time that you're seeing your OBGYN for your postpartum assessment, but they're not, I don't think that OBGYNs do a great job of like, you know, they'll say, well, get back into it and see how you feel. What I always tell women, incontinence is not normal, pain is not normal. If those things are going on as you resume activities that you were doing while you were pregnant, you need to go be assessed, because something could have happened. I just think it's good standard practice to see a PT 6 weeks postpartum, but typically 6 weeks is where we can kind of start to at least evaluate what return to exercise would look like.
Awesome. Okay, since you are a Colorado/Denver native, what is kind of like what's one or two spots, and not necessarily like restaurants, but kind of like places you can go hiking. So obviously Red Rocks is one that everybody knows, but what's maybe a spot or two that some of us that haven't been here that long maybe don't know that much about in terms of maybe a place to hike, or maybe just it's very scenic. What are a couple of spots that you enjoy that you wouldn't mind sharing with us?
If you're like in the Front Range and really in the city, I love the Clear Creek Bike Trail that you can access from the I-70 frontage road, and it'll take you into downtown Golden. So if you're kind of a new road biker, you're on pavement the whole time, but you're never really on the road, which is, I don't know, I think that's a really great little pearl for people.
Yeah.
And then, man, my dad would kill me if I say that for saying this, but the most beautiful place in Colorado is the Flat Tops Wilderness area. It's an area within the Flat Tops called Deep Lake. It's the most beautiful place in Colorado, in my opinion.
Cool.
It's a little bit inaccessible. You take the .0 exit, so it's pretty far west. But if you've got a good 4-wheel drive vehicle that can get you up there, you'll off-road a little bit to get there. But it's worth just don't spread the word too much about it.
Well, this isn't the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yeah.
So,
Not yet.
It'll still be somewhat of a secret, right?
Okay.
So Amy, awesome conversation, very thorough. Is there anything, before I ask you the last question, is there anything that you kind of just want to leave with the listeners? Maybe there's just something that that's kind of in your heart that you've been thinking about lately that you kind of want to share. Maybe it's just something in terms of physical therapy, health, wellness. However you want to take that, is there just maybe a final word or message that you kind of want to share with us and the listeners?
Yeah, I think that maybe, trust your body, trust its ability. It's so capable. It heals. It's incredible. Take care of it from all aspects that you can, but trust it. Trust it. Know that it's capable, more capable than you think.
Amen to that. Okay, the last question I have for you, Amy, what sets your soul on fire?
I think that really affecting change in people that have not found something that works for them in the traditional model, and thinking outside the box is what really sets me on fire. I love being able to help people get better when they've been told you can't do something, and telling them you can do this, and really framing things from a positive light and empowering people rather than restricting them.
Love it. Okay, so Amy, if anybody, which I know there's going to be people that they've resonated with your story, they've resonated with something that you shared, some of your expertise and insights. If somebody wants to find out more about you, if they like to find out more about your practice and everything that you've got going on, where can people follow along, find out more, and reach out to you?
Yeah, my blog is dramyosborne.com, OSBORNE. It's like the most commonly misspelled, probably not the most commonly, it's a very commonly misspelled last name. I'm Dr. Amy Osborne on Instagram. I assume that's what it is on Facebook. I don't know. I'm going to be honest with you. Don't reach out to me on Facebook. I'm not very active on there. And then my physical therapy practice is APTO, APTO, physicaltherapy.com. APTO is Latin for to make well. That's something I didn't, that's a little tidbit about me. I studied Latin in college.
Cool.
Really useful.
And then the place that we are having this podcast conversation is Nurture, correct?
Correct.
So just touch on this a little bit, explain like what it is, when the opening is going to be. I know Dr. Missy Albrecht, she's going to be practicing here too. She's been a previous podcast guest, so just talk about Nurture here for a quick minute.
Nurture is going to be so incredible. I feel so honored to be a part of this community. Essentially, it's a wellness marketplace, so we've got everything wellness related in one building. So we've got chiropractic, energy work, obviously PT. We've got a PA in here. There's a barber. There's hair care. And then there's a bunch of fitness. So Rhythm Revolution is going to be here. There's also a fitness space called Nexus where a bunch of people, myself included, will be teaching fitness classes.
Cool. Awesome.
There's a cafe downstairs that's going to be serving wonderful, amazing food. There's some retail space. And the most incredible thing, in my opinion, is that there's childcare. So you can come drop your child off and go sit in the salt cave, eat some lunch, get a chiropractic adjustment, see your practitioners all under one roof. And we're all going to be really collaborative, which, I think we recognize that it takes a village.
Absolutely.
So...
And when is Nurture actually going to be open?
Yes, grand opening is March 23rd.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yep.
Cool. Awesome.
Coming up.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to get a podcaster in here. I'm going to have to talk to whoever I need to talk to
Yeah,
about having a little podcast.
definitely.
Here, huh? Okay, cool. So, Amy, I just want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule just to come onto the podcast, share your story, again, share your expertise and insight. I just want to thank you, and it's greatly appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.
For sure. All right, so 127 Fit podcast listeners, once again, I just want to thank you for your listening ears. They're always greatly appreciated. If you'd like to find out more about myself or the guests that I'm bringing onto the podcast, you can find that information on Instagram at 127fit. Facebook is at Quentin Vars. LinkedIn is at Quentin Vars. If you guys would do me a huge favor and please leave a 5-star rating and review, and also subscribe to the podcast, especially within the Apple podcast platform, that would be greatly appreciated. Again, if you think you would be a great guest, or if you have a friend or an acquaintance you think would be a great guest or guest for the 127 Fit podcast, just send me an email or give this email out. The email is 127fit@gmail.com. And one other huge favor I'd ask of you guys, as you are finding great value in a specific episode or episodes of the 127 Fit podcast, as I know you are, take that specific episode and episodes you're finding that value in and share it on your Facebook and Instagram stories using the hashtag #BeSomeoneToFollow. And per the usual, I will leave you with Proverbs 24:10, which states, if you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. This time, until next time, I will catch you guys later.